I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My head was pounding, and every muscle in my body ached. As I tried to sit up, a wave of nausea swept over me, and I collapsed back onto the bed, shivering uncontrollably. "Elena, get up and clean this mess." Clayton's voice boomed from the living room. "I swear, you're just lazy. Can't even manage simple tasks while I'm at work." I dragged myself out of bed, my legs barely supporting my weight, and stumbled into the living room. Clayton was glaring at me, his eyes narrowed with disgust. The room was a mess, with dirty dishes piled in the sink and laundry scattered across the floor. "I'm sorry," I croaked, my throat raw and scratchy. "I've been feeling really sick." Before I could finish my sentence, Clayton cut me off. "That's no excuse. You're just lazy and unmotivated. I work all day to provide for us, and you can't even keep the house clean." His words stung, but I was too weak to argue. I tried to explain that I had a high fever and could barely stand, but he wasn't listening. He just kept berating me, his voice growing louder and more aggressive with each word. Suddenly, everything started spinning, and I felt myself falling. The last thing I heard was Clayton's voice, distant and distorted, before everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on the couch, a damp cloth on my forehead. Clayton was nowhere to be seen. As I tried to piece together what had happened, the memories came flooding back. The sickness, the mess, the yelling, and then the darkness. It wasn't the first time Clayton had lashed out at me like that. Over the past year, his behavior had become increasingly erratic and abusive. The man I had fallen in love with, kind, caring, and supportive, had been slowly replaced by someone I barely recognized. I thought back to the early days of our relationship when we couldn't get enough of each other. We had met in college, and from the moment we locked eyes, it was like we were the only two people in the world. We were inseparable, spending every waking moment together, talking about our hopes and dreams for the future. After graduation, we got married, and everything seemed perfect. We had good jobs, a nice apartment, and a love that felt unbreakable. But then, slowly but surely, things started to change. Clayton became more distant, more critical, and more controlling. He would pick apart everything I did, finding fault in even the smallest tasks. Nothing was ever good enough for him. I tried to talk to him about it, but he always brushed it off or turned it around on me. "You're just too sensitive," he would say. "I'm only trying to help you improve." But it wasn't just the criticism. There was a darkness in him that I had never seen before, a rage that simmered just beneath the surface. He would lash out over the smallest things, and his words cut deeper than any knife. As I lay on the couch, my body aching and my heart heavy, I knew that something had to change. I couldn't keep living like this, walking on eggshells, afraid of the next outburst. I had to find a way out, before it was too late. After my fainting spell, I couldn't stop thinking about how my life had taken such a dark turn. As I recovered in bed, memories of the early days with Clayton flooded my mind. The laughter, the joy, the unwavering support we had for each other. But those golden moments seemed like a lifetime ago, tarnished by the harsh reality of who he had become. I remembered the first time I saw a glimpse of his true nature. It was a few months after our wedding, and we were having a small get-together with friends. Clayton got into a heated argument with one of the guys over some trivial matter, and his face contorted into an expression of pure rage. His eyes were wild, his veins bulging, and for a moment I didn't even recognize him. After our friends left, I tried to talk to him about it, but he brushed it off as nothing. "Don't be so sensitive," he said, dismissing my concerns with a wave of his hand. But the incidents kept happening, and the mask he wore began to slip more and more. The verbal jabs became more frequent, the criticisms more biting. He would find fault in everything I did, no matter how hard I tried. One evening, as I was cooking dinner, he came up behind me and started berating me for the way I was chopping the vegetables. "Can't you do anything right?" he spat, his words dripping with venom. I was so taken aback that I dropped the knife, narrowly missing my foot. Clayton just laughed, as if it were all some big joke. That's when I remembered the warning signs I had ignored from his ex-girlfriend, Emily. She had tried to tell me about his volatile temper and controlling behavior, but I brushed it off, convinced that he had changed. "He's not the same person he was with me," I had told her, my voice brimming with naive optimism. But Emily saw through his facade. "Believe me, that's just an act," she had cautioned. "The real Clayton will show his true colors eventually." How right she was. As I lay in bed replaying those memories, something inside me shifted. A fire ignited, a determination to take back control of my life. I couldn't continue living in fear, walking on eggshells, waiting for the next outburst. I knew that leaving him wouldn't be easy. Clayton had a way of making me feel small, worthless, as if I couldn't survive without him. But I had to try. For my own sanity, for my own safety, I had to break free from his toxic grip. From that moment on, I started documenting everything. Every insult, every criticism, every act of aggression, no matter how small. I kept a detailed journal, recording dates, times, and specific incidents, building a case against him. Whenever he berated me for not doing enough around the house, I would calmly remind him that I worked just as many hours as he did. When he accused me of being lazy or unmotivated, I would list out all the tasks I had accomplished that day, refusing to let him diminish my efforts. It was a daily battle, but I was determined to stand my ground. I started making plans, researching my options, and reaching out to friends and family for support. I knew that leaving him wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As I looked back on the person I had become, meek, submissive, a shell of my former self, I felt a surge of resolve. No more. I was done being a victim. It was time to take back control and reclaim the life that was rightfully mine. The days that followed were a constant battle, a tug-of-war between my newfound determination and Clayton's relentless belittling. Every morning I would wake up with a sense of dread, wondering what fresh hell awaited me. Despite working long shifts at the hospital, I was still expected to maintain a spotless home and have dinner ready the moment Clayton walked through the door. If anything was out of place or not up to his impossible standards, the verbal onslaught would begin. "What have you been doing all day?" he would snarl, kicking off his shoes and leaving them in the middle of the living room floor. "This place is a pigsty." I would calmly explain that I had just finished a 12-hour shift, but he would dismiss my explanations with a wave of his hand. "Excuses, excuses. That's all I ever hear from you." No matter how hard I tried, it was never enough for him. The laundry wasn't folded to his liking, the dishes weren't cleaned properly, the floors weren't shining bright enough. He would nitpick and criticize every little thing, his voice dripping with contempt. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at the hospital, I came home to find Clayton pacing around the living room, his face flushed with anger. "Where the hell have you been?" he spat as soon as I walked through the door. "I told you, I had to work late," I replied, too exhausted to argue. "There was an emergency, and we were short-staffed." "Oh, that's convenient," he sneered. "You're always working late, aren't you? Or are you just out gallivanting with other men?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Clayton, that's not fair. You know I would never." Before I could finish, he cut me off with a harsh slap across the face. The force of the blow knocked me backwards, and I stumbled, clutching my stinging cheek. "Don't you dare talk back to me," he roared, his eyes wild with rage. "I'm the one who brings home the money, and you ungrateful bitch better show some respect." I stood there, stunned, tears streaming down my face. This wasn't the first time he had hit me, but it never got any easier. Each blow chipped away at my self-worth, leaving me feeling smaller and more worthless than before. As Clayton stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door behind him, I sank to the floor, my body shaking with sobs. I knew I had to get out, but the thought of leaving filled me with terror. Where would I go? How would I support myself? But then I remembered the journal I had been keeping, the meticulous documentation of every insult, every slap, every degrading remark. I had evidence, proof of the hell I had been living in. With renewed determination, I picked myself up off the floor and made my way to the kitchen. I grabbed a bag of frozen peas from the freezer and held it against my throbbing cheek, wincing at the pain. As I sat there, icing my bruised face, a plan began to form in my mind. I couldn't leave, not yet. I needed more evidence, more ammunition to use against him. But this time, it wouldn't just be written words on a page. This time, I needed something more concrete, something undeniable. From that night on, I started secretly recording our interactions, capturing Clayton's explosive outbursts and vicious insults on my phone. Every time he raised his voice or his hand, I would hit record, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a dangerous game, but I was tired of living in fear. I was done being a victim. This time, I was going to fight back, and I was going to win. It was supposed to be a happy occasion, a family dinner to celebrate my younger brother's new job, but Clayton, as usual, found a way to turn it into a nightmare. From the moment we arrived at the restaurant, he was in a foul mood, snapping at the hostess and glaring at anyone who dared to make eye contact with him. I tried to diffuse the tension with small talk and forced smiles, but the dark cloud hanging over us was impossible to ignore. "So, Jake," Clayton said, turning his attention to my brother with a condescending smirk, "what kind of job did you manage to get? Flipping burgers, I assume?" Jake bristled at the insult, but he kept his cool. "Actually, I landed a position at a software company. Entry level, but it's a foot in the door." "Well, isn't that precious?" Clayton sneered, taking a swig of his beer. "Maybe one day you'll be able to afford a real job like mine." I could see the hurt flashing across Jake's face, but he remained composed. "I'm just grateful for the opportunity," he said evenly, "and I'm excited to see where it leads." Clayton let out a derisive snort, his lip curling with disdain. "If you're not careful, you'll end up like your sister, stuck in a dead-end job, slaving away for peanuts." That was the final straw. I had sat idly by, letting Clayton belittle and berate me for far too long, but I couldn't let him talk about my career, my passion, like that. "Excuse me?" I snapped, my voice trembling with anger. "I'm a nurse, Clayton. I save lives every single day. How dare you act like what I do is worthless?" For a moment, Clayton looked taken aback, as if he couldn't believe I had the audacity to talk back to him. Then his face contorted into a mask of rage, his eyes narrowing dangerously. "Watch your tone with me, woman," he growled, leaning across the table. "Or do you need another lesson in respect?" The threat was clear, and a chill ran down my spine. I opened my mouth to respond, but Jake beat me to it. "Don't talk to her like that," he said, his voice low and steady. "She's your wife, not your punching bag." Clayton whipped his head around, his gaze settling on my brother like a laser sight. "This is none of your business, kid. Stay out of it before you get hurt." But Jake refused to back down. "It is my business when you're treating my sister like garbage." The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Clayton's face was flushed with fury, his nostrils flaring as he struggled to control his temper. "Let's go," he snarled, tossing a handful of bills onto the table. "This dinner is over." As we left the restaurant, Jake pulled me aside, his eyes filled with concern. "Elena, what's going on?" he asked, his voice hushed. "That's not how a husband should treat his wife." I opened my mouth to brush it off, to make excuses for Clayton's behavior like I always did. But something in Jake's gaze stopped me. For the first time, I saw the situation through his eyes, the constant belittling, the veiled threats, the simmering violence just beneath the surface. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't keep living like this. "It's complicated," I said, my voice wavering. "But I promise I'll explain everything. Just not here." Jake nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Whenever you're ready," he said. "I'm here for you, sis. No matter what." As we drove home in tense silence, Clayton seething in the front seat while Jake and I exchanged worried glances in the back, I knew that the time for secrets was over. If I was going to get out of this nightmare, I needed all the help I could get. And who better to have in my corner than the one person who had been looking out for me since the day I was born? The next few days were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. After the disastrous dinner, I knew I couldn't keep living in fear any longer. It was time to take action. Jake was true to his word, and he became my rock, my unwavering support system. When I finally worked up the courage to tell him the truth about the abuse I had been enduring, he didn't hesitate for a second. "We're going to get you out of this, Elena," he said, his voice steady and determined, "whatever it takes." Together, we hatched a plan. We needed undeniable evidence of Clayton's behavior, something that would hold up in court if it came to that. Audio recordings were a good start, but we needed visuals too. "What if we set up cameras around the house?" Jake suggested. "That way we can capture everything. The insults, the threats, even any physical altercations." The idea made me nervous, but I knew it was our best shot. Clayton was becoming increasingly erratic, his outbursts more frequent and more violent. Who knew how far he might go if left unchecked? We decided to keep things simple. A few discreet cameras in the main living areas, nothing too obvious that might tip Clayton off. Jake handled the technical side, ordering the equipment and setting it up while I was at work. The first few days were nerve-wracking, waiting for something to happen. Every time I heard Clayton's heavy footsteps or raised voice, my heart would start pounding, and I would brace myself for the worst. And then, it happened. I was in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner, when Clayton stormed in, his face contorted with rage. "What the hell is this?" he snarled, thrusting a crumpled piece of paper in my face. It was the phone bill, with a series of numbers highlighted in bold. "Who have you been calling?" he demanded, his voice low and menacing. "Is it another man? Are you cheating on me?" "Clayton, no, it's nothing like that," I protested, trying to keep my voice steady. "Those are just calls to my brother. You know that." But he wasn't listening. In a flash, his hand lashed out, striking me across the face with such force that I stumbled backwards, clutching my stinging cheek. "Don't lie to me, you ungrateful bitch," he roared, advancing on me like a predator cornering its prey. "I work my ass off to provide for you, and this is how you repay me?" I cowered in the corner, my heart racing as he towered over me, his fists clenched at his sides. For a moment I was certain he was going to hit me again, or worse. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, the rage seemed to drain out of him. He straightened up, smoothing his shirt and running a hand through his hair. "Clean yourself up," he said, his voice eerily calm. "You look pathetic." And with that, he turned on his heel and left the kitchen, leaving me trembling and fighting back tears. Later that night, when I was sure Clayton was asleep, I crept into the living room and checked the camera footage. There it was, captured in high definition. The false accusation, the physical assault, the cruel insults. I felt sick to my stomach watching it unfold, but at the same time a sense of grim satisfaction washed over me. This was the evidence we needed, the smoking gun that would finally bring Clayton's reign of terror to an end. From that moment on, the cameras became my silent guardians, recording every twisted scene as it played out. And with each new incident, my resolve only grew stronger. Clayton had pushed me to my breaking point, but this time, I wasn't going to break. This time, I was going to fight back, and I was going to win. The day had finally come. After weeks of planning and gathering evidence, it was time to confront Clayton and put an end to his abuse once and for all. Jake and I had gone over the plan countless times, making sure every detail was perfect. We would sit Clayton down in the living room, away from potential weapons or breakable objects, and present him with the undeniable proof of his actions. The videos, the audio recordings, the documented instances of physical and emotional assault, we had it all. A damning case against him that not even his silver tongue could talk his way out of. As I waited for Clayton to come home from work, my heart was pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. What if he reacted violently? What if he tried to hurt me, or worse, hurt Jake? But I pushed those thoughts aside. We had come too far to back down now. This was my chance to take back control, to break free from the cycle of abuse that had consumed my life for far too long. When Clayton finally walked through the door, I steeled myself, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves. "Clayton, we need to talk," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. He looked at me with a mixture of confusion and annoyance, clearly not expecting the confrontation. "What's this about?" he asked, setting down his briefcase and loosening his tie. "Let's go into the living room," I replied, gesturing for him to follow. He rolled his eyes but complied, sinking onto the couch with a heavy sigh. "All right, let's get this over with," he grumbled. That's when Jake emerged from the hallway, a grim expression on his face. Clayton's eyes narrowed as he took in the unexpected presence of my brother. "What's he doing here?" he demanded, his voice taking on an edge of hostility. Before I could respond, Jake spoke up. "We know what you've been doing, Clayton," he said, his tone firm and unwavering. "The abuse, the violence, the control, it all stops now." Clayton's face twisted into a sneer, and he opened his mouth to unleash a torrent of insults and denials. But Jake held up a hand, cutting him off. "Don't bother lying," he said. "We have proof." With a flick of his wrist, Jake pulled up the video footage on his laptop, the screen flickering to life with a montage of Clayton's worst moments, the shouting, the threats, the physical assaults. Clayton's eyes widened as he watched himself lash out, his face contorting with rage with each sickening blow. For a moment he was rendered speechless, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. But the shock quickly gave way to fury. "You've been spying on me?" he roared, leaping to his feet and sending the laptop crashing to the floor. "How dare you, in my own home?" Jake remained calm, unflinching in the face of Clayton's towering rage. "We did what we had to do to protect Elena," he said, his voice steady. "And now it's over. The police are on their way." As if on cue, the sound of sirens pierced the air, growing louder with each passing second. Clayton's eyes darted back and forth, his chest heaving as he realized the trap he had walked into. "You're making a big mistake," he growled, his voice low and menacing. "You won't get away with this." But his threats rang hollow, his bravado crumbling as the flashing lights of the police cars flooded the room. As the officers swarmed in, weapons drawn, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It was finally happening. The nightmare was coming to an end. Clayton put up a token resistance, spitting vile insults and accusations as the officers wrestled him into handcuffs. But it was too late. The evidence was overwhelming, and for once, his silver tongue couldn't talk his way out of the consequences of his actions. As they led him away, his face twisted with impotent rage, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumphant satisfaction. For years he had controlled me, beaten me down, made me feel small and worthless. But not anymore. With Clayton's arrest, I had finally reclaimed my power, my freedom, my life. And as I watched his car disappear down the street, I knew that a new chapter was beginning, one where I would never again be a victim. The weeks following Clayton's arrest were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and emotional turmoil. But through it all, I clung to the knowledge that I had finally taken back control of my life. The evidence we had gathered, the videos, the audio recordings, the documented instances of abuse, painted a damning picture that even Clayton's high-priced lawyers couldn't refute. His attempts to discredit me and portray himself as the victim fell flat in the face of such overwhelming proof. As the court dates rolled around, I found myself steeling my nerves, determined to face my tormentor head-on. Jake was by my side every step of the way, a rock of unwavering support. When I took the stand, Clayton's eyes bored into me with a mixture of rage and desperation. His carefully cultivated mask of charm had slipped, revealing the true monster underneath. "You're ruining everything," he snarled as I delivered my testimony, recounting the years of emotional and physical abuse I had endured. "You were nothing before me, and you'll be nothing without me." But his words held no power over me anymore. I met his gaze with a calm, unwavering resolve, my voice steady and strong as I laid bare the truth of our twisted relationship. In the end, the evidence was too overwhelming to ignore. Clayton was slapped with a restraining order, barring him from coming within 1,000 feet of me or my family. The judge also awarded me a substantial divorce settlement, ensuring that I would be able to start fresh without the financial burden of our shared assets weighing me down. As the verdict was read, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Justice had been served, and Clayton's reign of terror was finally over. But the true vindication came in the weeks and months that followed, as the ripple effects of his exposure began to take hold. Word of his arrest and conviction spread like wildfire through his professional circles, and the once charming salesman found himself shunned and ostracized. Clients and colleagues alike wanted nothing to do with a man who had been exposed as a violent abuser. Within weeks, he was unceremoniously fired from his high-paying job, his reputation in tatters. The expensive suits and fancy cars were gone, replaced by a humiliating reality of unemployment and social pariah status. As for me, I found myself embarking on a new chapter, one filled with possibility and promise. With the weight of Clayton's oppression finally lifted, I was free to pursue my dreams and ambitions without fear or limitation. I threw myself into my work at the hospital, channeling my newfound strength and resilience into caring for others. My colleagues remarked on the change in my demeanor, the newfound confidence and determination that radiated from me. And in my personal life, I became an advocate for victims of domestic abuse, sharing my story and offering support to those still trapped in the cycle of violence. I knew firsthand the shame and isolation that came with being a victim, and I was determined to be a beacon of hope for others struggling to find their own path to freedom. As I stood at my kitchen window one morning, sipping a steaming cup of coffee and watching the sunrise, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come. The woman I was a year ago, cowering in fear and drowning in self-doubt, felt like a distant memory. In her place stood a survivor, a fighter, a woman who had stared down her demons and emerged victorious. The scars of my past would never fully heal, but they served as a reminder of the strength I had found within myself, a strength that no one, not even Clayton, could ever take away. And as the warm rays of the new day washed over me, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope and optimism for the future. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew that I had the courage and resilience to face them head-on. My nightmare was over, and a new beginning awaited. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow over the city skyline. As I stood by the window, sipping my morning coffee, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace wash over me, a feeling that had been all too rare in the past. It had been 6 months since Clayton's arrest and the subsequent legal proceedings that had finally freed me from his toxic grip. 6 months of healing, of rediscovering who I was, without the constant weight of his abuse weighing me down. The journey hadn't been easy, of course. There were still moments when the memories would come flooding back, triggering waves of anxiety and self-doubt. But with the help of a supportive therapist and the unwavering love of my family, I was learning to cope, to process the trauma in a healthy way. And as the days turned into weeks and months, I found myself embracing a newfound sense of strength and resilience. The fragile, broken woman I had once been was slowly giving way to a survivor, a fighter who had stared down her demons and emerged victorious. At work, I channeled that energy into my nursing duties, approaching each patient with a level of empathy and compassion that could only come from someone who had walked through the flames of adversity. My colleagues remarked on the change in my demeanor, the newfound confidence that seemed to radiate from me. "You're like a different person," one of the nurses remarked over coffee one day. "It's like a weight has been lifted off your shoulders." I couldn't help but smile, thinking back to the dark days when that weight had felt suffocating, crushing me beneath its oppressive force. "You have no idea," I replied, taking a sip of my coffee and allowing the warmth to spread through me. Outside of work, I had become an advocate for victims of domestic abuse, sharing my story and offering support to those still trapped in the cycle of violence. I knew firsthand the shame and isolation that came with being a victim, and I was determined to be a beacon of hope for others struggling to find their own path to freedom. Speaking at support groups and shelters, I would recount my own experiences, pulling no punches in my descriptions of Clayton's cruelty and the emotional turmoil I had endured. But I would also emphasize the importance of staying strong, of never losing sight of one's self-worth in the face of such abuse. "You are not defined by what was done to you," I would tell them, my voice ringing with conviction. "You are a survivor, a warrior, and you have the strength within you to break free." And as I looked out over the faces of those brave souls, their eyes shining with a mixture of pain and hope, I knew that my words were making a difference. They saw in me a living embodiment of what was possible, a woman who had clawed her way out of the darkness and reclaimed her life. Of course, there were still moments when the shadows of my past would creep in, threatening to overwhelm me. But I had learned to confront those demons head-on, to draw strength from the battles I had already won. I would think back to that fateful day when Clayton was led away in handcuffs, his once intimidating presence reduced to a pitiful, impotent rage. I would remember the sense of triumph that had washed over me, the knowledge that I had finally taken back control of my life. And in those moments I would square my shoulders and lift my chin, letting the memories of my hard-won victory fill me with a renewed sense of determination. Because even though the scars of my past would never fully heal, they served as a reminder of the strength I had found within myself, a strength that no one, not even Clayton, could ever take away. As the sun continued its ascent, bathing the city in a warm, golden hue, I took a deep breath and smiled. A new day was dawning, filled with endless possibilities and the promise of a brighter future. My nightmare was over, and a brand new chapter was just beginning.